I'll tell you this only because it's a little humorful. I just realized as David was reading that I knew what the title of the reading was, but I read the wrong chapter. And while I almost never take offense or counter anything Swami Kriyananda says, so I'm hearing for the first time, he says, don't pester God. And I thought to myself, God, I've been pestering him for 70 years and it's been working. I'm going to keep pestering him. I heard a wonderful joke recently that's so relevant for our talk today. Why ask God for anything when he already knows everything? Why offer him anything when he already has everything? So there was a man walking on the beach, and suddenly God appeared to him. And God said, you've been a really great devotee. You've been very faithful, very prayerful. He said, so I'm going to offer you, I'm going to make any one of your prayers come true. You tell me what your wish is, what your prayer is, and I'm going to give it to you. And the man was so happy. He said, God, I'm so happy about this. I've always wanted to go to Hawaii, but I'm terrified to fly. So I'd like you to build me a bridge over the ocean to Hawaii. And God stops and he goes, now, son, think about that. That's impossible. Can you just imagine the logistics of that? God shakes his head. He said, think of another prayer. So the man gets quiet and he says, okay. He said, God, I've been married 4 times, and all of my wives tell me that I'm insensitive. So I'd like to understand how women work. I'd like to know. I didn't get to the punchline yet, guys. I'd like to know why they feel the way they feel, why they think the way they think. There's a long pause, and God says, son, would you like 2 lanes or 4 lanes on that bridge? I was listening to a talk that Bharat gave. This was many years ago, Bharat up at the village, and he was talking about the study of the cosmos. And he was saying in that talk that he pointed out the fact, he said cosmologists would say that the sun has held the earth in a perfect position, exactly the right position for what the earth needs, so that it's not too hot and it's not too cold. It just works right, which is, of course, the truth. And Bharat said it's been doing that for 4.5 billion years. And I remember when I heard him, I don't really remember the context that he was speaking in, but it came back to me yesterday that it's very much like the relationship of our soul to God, that we are really in perfect relationship to him, given where our soul is or who we are, that we, in essence, are creating our own universe, each of us. And we do that with our thoughts. We do that with how we see the world, with our expectations, with what each of us calls reality. But that as we begin to move closer to God, as we begin to, and I was listening to Karen sing the last verse of that song that she sang, I long for thee in summer and in winter, only for thee. My heart, as it beats evermore, thirsts, it's better than beats, thirsts evermore. Anyway, the whole ending of that song comes around. Through many lives I've wandered, here I am. Now I want only you. Now nothing else. And she sang it so beautifully. You felt that soul longing for God. And it's exactly at that moment that God can come in and can change our relationship to him, that he can enter and serve us Once we come and we say, I want only thee, which is what the last verse of that song says, and just says it so beautifully. Until then, there's nothing he can do. And over in things that Swamiji writes throughout, I happen to be teaching the Raja Yoga course right now along with many people, but in so many ways, Swamiji just keeps saying, no matter what the lesson is, that this path to God takes such supreme effort. And he's not saying that to discourage us. He's saying it to say, come on, step up to the plate. This is what you need to do to get what you think you want. And God's waiting for us to say, only you. I'm going to devote everything to just you now. And then God can come. But again, with supreme effort in what seems like an endless journey right now to look for the perfect cartoon for a talk that I have to give up at the village in a few weeks on meditation and science. I've been looking at so many cartoons, so I saw a cartoon a few days ago. Little boy's there. He's kneeling next to his bed, looking irritated. Mom's right behind him, watching him, looking equally irritated. And she said, okay, Billy, the whole thing now, none of this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, that we really need to show up. Now, what's interesting is that we are often talking to God, which is really what prayer is. Prayer is that way that we talk to God with the deep longing of our soul that says that, I want you now. That's what prayer is. So it's this, what we hope is a dialogue. Unfortunately, for many of us, it's often a monologue for a while. We're talking, and I think often we're talking in ways we don't realize. Some of you may remember a couple of weeks ago when I gave a sermon, I pointed out that 70% of the time, our brain is focused on problems and negative things, and it actually enjoys that. It tries very hard to keep us there. So we have this endless stream of ways that we're communicating these thoughts that we put out, and words, which are just crystallized thoughts, but they make such an impression. When I said before, we create our own universe. This is a lot of how we do it. So we're constantly saying things like, I'm never going to get this job. Nothing's ever going to go right. My child's never going to make it where I want him to make it. And I've said to people who say to me, I'm never going to get this job, or anything that sounds like that, don't bother going for the interview, because you're absolutely right. We create a reality. Those words have a huge impact. They carry enormous magnetism. That's what it is. And it's wonderful when the magnetism is upward and expansive and reaching to God. But they are no less powerful when we run around with this endless stream of negativity. We don't really call it that. We think we're just, we don't even think. I think we're not thinking. These things are just flowing through our heads. This won't happen, that can't happen. And we are writing our own future. We're basically putting a prophecy into motion that's going to come true. It's amazing how easy it is. I feel this myself when I was thinking about this talk. I realized how much I love telling a difficult or negative story. Oh, we went away, and then this happened, and that didn't work, and this. And the end of the story is always, but we had a great time. But I love to tell everybody the details. I've heard myself saying stories like this 3, 4, 5 times. I was thinking about this yesterday. I thought to myself, you stop that. That is amazing energy to be putting out in the world. These words are that we use. And again, remember, words are just crystallized thoughts. It doesn't matter if you don't say it. once you have the thought, it's set into motion. They're like seeds that we're planting for our whole life. And if we plant those seeds in negative soil, they grow like weeds and they strangle the life out of us. And we never know why. We think it's just bad luck or this is how life goes. If we plant them in fertile, positive soil, then we blossom the way a flower or a plant can blossom. We grow upward. We reach to the light. When we're not doing that, then we're really calling on mediocrity. We're calling on negativity. And those are prayers, just as much as anything. But when we pray believing, as Master said, when we use demand prayers, when we come at it like the reading from Whispers that Ginny read today, that's a demand prayer. You must come, you must do this. We are your children with absolute expectation that we will get what we need in this world to flourish and to prosper. Then it comes. And in interesting ways, God then can do the impossible. We offer our energy up with great magnetism, and then what happens? All of those things that we call miracles. That's what goes on. So I have a couple of things I want to read you here, but I first want to say Swamiji went through it a little bit in the reading today, unbeknownst to me, just because I wasn't on the same chapter with him. But really, when we think about what is prayer, we know that it is this act of attuning ourselves to God's grace, of magnetizing ourselves with our words, with our thoughts, so that we can then be in a position to receive that which it is that God would love to give us. This is all He's waiting for, that we're creating a channel through which God's love can flow. This is exactly what prayer's doing. It's saying, I'm here, I'm going to raise myself up, I'm going to open myself up, I'm going to allow your energy to flow to me and through me. But we have got to make that first gesture, very much as Swamiji said, not because God needs to hear it, not at all, but because He has to wait for us to be willing to receive Him. There's a beautiful piece that I ran across. I actually looked for it because I remembered it. You know, C.S. Lewis has been a writer of many great things, but really very often his writing is in and around his relationship with God. And some years ago, I don't remember when it was, there was actually a movie made of his life. And that was quite a while ago, but I remembered something about it, a couple of sentences from it, that I loved when I saw that movie. So I went searching for them. And some of you may or may not know that C.S. Lewis got married to a woman who he had fallen deeply in love with, but who was diagnosed with cancer before they got married. So their whole marriage was in and around her illness, their relationship with God, their struggle, really, for what faith means, who God was. This was a man who was deeply believing. And then she died. And one of his friends said to him, basically, with not just a little sarcasm, you prayed and you prayed and you prayed to your God, and this is how He answered you, meaning He took your wife from you. And C.S. Lewis says, that's not why I pray, Harry. This is the line from the movie that I remembered. I pray because I can't help myself. I pray because I'm helpless. I pray because the need flows out of me at all times, waking and sleeping. It doesn't change God, Harry. It changes me. Isn't that beautiful? Just says it so beautifully. This prayer is pulled from me, because that's what happens when I want to be closer to God. That's when the right, if you will, the positive, the uplifting prayer, the prayer which creates an avenue through which God can really come to us. I pray not because God needs it. It doesn't change God. Our prayers change us. And then there was this other wonderful quote of Desmond Tutu, who was, as we all know, I mean, he really did a lot, fought a lot for apartheid. But he was also an Anglican archbishop. And this is a little piece that was written by a journalist who went to see him when he was very ill. And both the journalist and he knew that it might be the last interview that he ever granted. So for both of them, and they both stated this, it held a great deal of power and importance. And as soon as this interviewer, this journalist, walked in, and he said he was saying to himself, gee, I wonder what he's going to talk to me about. All of the political climate, what he did to change things, his role in all of that. But as soon as he walked in, Tutu looked at him and he said, if this is going to be my last interview, he said, I'm really glad we're not going to talk about politics. He just put it out right then. He said, let's talk about prayer and adoration, about faith and hope and forgiveness. Let's talk about prayer, he said, and adoration. And really, that is the key to what we need to do when we're praying. How is it that we contact God? He called it adoration. I would call it devotion. I would say that devotion is the heart lifting itself up where it knows, into divine consciousness, where it knows it can experience and be one with God's love. It's that effort that we make to take everything that we want in the world through the heart and meet God with our love and our devotion so that we can live with Him. That's what we're saying we want with prayer, and there is no other way. This is why Sri Yukteswar, Yogananda's guru, always said we cannot put one foot in front of the other without opening our heart, without practicing the devotion of God's love, because God is a manifestation of pure love. And when Tutu said, let's talk about adoration, you hear that word, you just feel your heart open. There's a beautiful, Swami Kriyananda wrote a book called The Essence of Self-Realization, and it's just conversation after conversation. He's quoting Yogananda in each of the pieces that he put in this book. And so there's different subjects in there, different topics for each chapter. I actually didn't even look. I'm sure there's one on prayer, but I forgot to look. I probably would have if I had remembered. But there's a piece that he wrote in there when he says, this is Yogananda's words now, Divine Mother is busy with her housework of creation. I love that. That's Divine Mother's housework. He said, and then the baby devotee starts crying. And it cries and it's cried. So Divine Mother gives that baby a toy. And that toy might be riches, it could be name, it could be fame. This is what Master said. But it quits crying for a while. And so the mother lets it alone. Then it cries again. And then Divine Mother will give us another toy. But it's not until we throw away those toys and say, quit trying to sidetrack me. This is not what I want. I want you. I don't want all of these other things. And we cry and cry and we scream for that. And the more we practice in prayer, the less ability Divine Mother has to turn her back on us. She simply can't. What mother can turn their back on a child that's crying like it means it? Not a little whimper. Whimpers we ignore. We give the child what it needs and we go about doing our housework, whatever it is. But when that child starts screaming, really with meaning, that's what happens. And this is what Master's saying. Pray to God with all of that energy, with all of your willpower. This is why he says, that, it's true, but the greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. The greater the flow of energy, the greater the magnetism. And we are putting forth that magnetism to draw the divine, to join with all the magnetism that God is and has to bring to us. There's a movie that I never saw, and I never saw it because the name of it is Hacksaw Ridge. And I never knew what the movie was about until last night. Who would go and see a movie called Hacksaw Ridge? Actually, I think it's a really bad name for the movie because I don't know how many of you saw the movie or know the story, but it's the story of a man whose name is Desmond Doss. And Desmond Doss was a Seventh-day Adventist, a very prayerful man. I think he was raised in Virginia or North Carolina, somewhere on the East Coast. And he really took the Bible literally, and he read it all the time. And when the Second World War started, he felt that he had to go and serve his country. But he took very seriously the Ten Commandments of thou shalt not kill. But he was filled with prayer. So much of his day, every day, was in prayer, reading the Bible and then praying, having this constant talk with God. And he volunteered. But he said to them, I want to be a medic. I won't carry a gun. Even in basic training, he wouldn't touch a rifle. He wouldn't learn how to use a rifle. They were actually trying to, what's that called when they throw somebody out? Well, discharge is not somebody. Court-martial. They were trying to court-martial him, but they couldn't find grounds. They couldn't make it stick. And everybody from basic training to the people that he was in training with, everybody was really hard on him. They played terrible tricks on him. They just did horrible, mean things to him. They were frankly abusive. They called him names all the time. His sergeants gave him really hard assignments. This is all a true story. And he just would go back and pray. He just stayed in prayer all the time. And then he said to them, and by the way, I need to have Saturdays off in the morning. It's my Sabbath. I need to go and pray. He was just absolutely not touched by their animosity, by their negativity. And then he went out to fight because he was a medic. And he wound up receiving not only every medal of honor that could be given, but in fact, he was the first recipient of a couple of those. I don't know what all the names were, because on Okinawa, he saved at least 75 lives. Some people say it was in the hundreds. He never touched a gun. He would never think of shooting anybody, but he saved. They were up on what was called Hacksaw Ridge. He would sit, he would pray, God, I know we can do this together. And he would climb up on the ridge and pull down all of the infantrymen who were wounded. And one after another, when none of his fellow infantry people would go with him, they said they were incredulous. He prayed in between every climb back up that ridge, which apparently in and of itself wasn't easy. How is that? How do people do that? How do we find that kind of courage and commitment and willingness? We have to practice those things with supreme effort as Swamiji says, offering ourselves up so that miracles can happen, so that God can enter our life and do the impossible. And it's not easy, just like nothing on the path is easy. This is why these great souls, like Brother Lawrence and Frank Laubach, these people who decided to practice the presence of God through prayer, are so inspiring, because they started, it wasn't easy. They could pray once in the morning, pray in the evening, but they started praying more and more often. They started calling God calling God more often during the day, till their prayers started coalescing, and until God was all they could think about. And that is exactly what we need to be doing. Really, in essence, you know what we're talking about? We're talking about committing ourselves to falling in love with God. That's what it is. I thought yesterday, what is life like when we're falling in love? What do we want with that partner? We want to tell them everything that's important to us. We want to ask them all about them. We want to tell them constantly how much they mean to us. When you just fall in love, is there any effort that's too great? Of course not. You're asking yourself sometimes, unfortunately, 10 years later, where is all that energy? We have to fall in love with God. We need to make it ever new. We need that kind of adoration, that kind of devotion. And then we ourselves, of course, God meets us where we are. We ourselves raise ourselves up into that infinite consciousness, into that heart that is the heart and soul of it all.